Hey guys, it's Awesomemay, and it's that time of year again we get a Pixar movie. And it's that time again the general public starts biting their nails over if Pixar will stay on their feet through the hell Disney is going through. After Lightyear, the perception of the studio went from Pixar might miss a couple times but they usually hit, to then, oh god, this might suck. It seemed like we were getting into a period of time we were no longer letting Pixar be a silver lining for animation studios and Hollywood studios in general. That role switched over to DreamWorks for a little while, and even Illumination started getting an upper hand. Although, I was standing strong with them because Luca and Turning Red are so good. Some of you need to stop lying to yourselves. When Pixar announced they were going to make a sequel to one of their, in my opinion, most emotional films, I was skeptical at first. Obviously, I'm not gonna lie. I knew somehow this film would be able to be really fun. The whole concept of Inside Out can make like 10 movies and a couple spin-off series, but my worry really lied on how they would come close to having as much meaning as Inside Out did, how they were gonna expand Riley growing up and facing new challenges in a less obvious way, how they would make other characters have developments as emotional as Bing Bongs. I still cannot watch this scene without getting a lump in my throat, but I will say that my skepticalness is mostly because I was not prepared for this movie to come out so soon. Yes, I know it's almost been 9 years at this point. That's a lot of time. But I remember when they announced it late 2022, and they announced it like they were really early in production, so I was prepared to wait 4 or 5 years. But I'm so glad I was wrong. They needed this movie at the moment so badly. Second biggest box office opening. We're so back. There's been two sides of movie announcements recently where they either announce the movie or sequel way too early, or they promote the movie super late. Like, Pixar, I love you, but why do I need to know that you're thinking about an Incredibles 3? That is useless information to me. My big hope for this sequel off the bat was for a Monsters University situation where sure, the story really relies more on being entertaining and a good theater experience than its predecessor, but it still wraps everything into a good moral that's not too on the nose. Monsters University for me really showed that Pixar could insert a really interesting metaphor in their movies that maybe don't even really need it. Having a story about how maybe you will fail but that can lead you to something different in life is so smart. So much better than just a follow your dreams and don't give up movie. And that really set in stone that Pixar actually cares when it comes to expanding on their original ideas. To be honest with you guys, I'll take as many sequels as they want to make as long as they're good. I feel like people have gone so overboard with the we hate unoriginal movies and cash grabs mentality. I don't really care if a studio is making money off of me. They just need to give me something enjoyable if they're gonna do it. That should be common sense. And when I saw the little character reveals for Inside Out 2, I knew I was gonna be there opening day no matter what. I love embarrassment. I love that Pixar is pushing a more cartoony look with this universe. Okay, I feel like I need to end this intro. I'm teasing you guys at this point. I did watch the movie and I absolutely loved it. It's not as emotional as the first movie, of course, but there's so many new concepts explored that could not have worked better. And let's get into it. The movie opens up wasting absolutely no time, and I love that. The best sequel openers actually work so much better when they don't treat themselves like a sequel. I don't need a full recap of the first movie. I already watched that movie. Find other ways to do it. This movie reintroduces all the characters by having Joy bring each character out like a WWE match while they take turns controlling Riley during a game of hockey, and it's phenomenal. Instantly connects this movie to the first one. The writers were awake and busy when writing this movie. I love that Pixar knows that the core story does not need a full crazy adventure. Animated movies can be treated as live action movies, and the first 20 minutes really showcases that this is going to be a coming of age film just like any other coming of age movie, just with like the added element that it's 3D animated and also there's talking emotion characters. The Inside Out movies remind me of Raina Telgemeier books, not only because they both focus on teenage girl characters, obviously, but both of them realize that it's super interesting alone to see the world through the eyes of these characters. I think slice of life is sometimes so much more fun to watch than a story. Of course, there still has to be a connected goal, but I also want to see them just live life. I think that's so cool. I will say, to me, Riley seems kind of like a different character in this movie, and I think that's because of how drastically the animation style has changed. It works because she's older now, but there's a scene where Riley meets her new friends, and for a second I didn't notice it was even her. She looks like she belongs in Turning Red. However, that negativity aside, I do really appreciate how well this movie does separating real life scenarios from inside her head. They choose to make the emotions a lot more cartoony, and it offers some amazing animated gags. It's probably the smoothest animation we've seen from Pixar, so satisfying. I can tell there was a lot of planning when it comes to the balance of Riley's real life to the headquarters, and I think they actually nail it more than the first one. It never feels like any parts of this movie are reaching for attention. Riley ends up doing really well at her middle school game and is invited to a 3-day hockey camp to see if she's good enough to join the high school team. The hockey camp ends up playing as the main idea on how as Riley grows up, her worth is becoming less centered around family and friends, but more on winning, appealing to people, and being a successful player and person. The movie ends up kind of exploring how your quality of self can become determined less on having fulfilling life experiences, but more on accomplishments that you feel are good enough to allow you to deserve to enjoy life. I think that's such a relatable feeling we start to get growing up, and this movie sort of puts into perspective how unfair and unnecessary that outlook is to ourselves. And I can't think of a better concept to focus this movie on and introduce you-know-who into the mix. I hate this little Muppet yogurt bottle mascot looking character. With Riley being 13, there has been so many new updates in the headquarters. We get this belief system, which I would have never thought of. I love that idea. It felt very Nintendo Animal Crossing in terms of relaxing visuals. Pixar knows how to reach into the pits of my soul. It almost gave me an existential crisis. Joy running her hands along the belief cords as we hear Riley saying good things she believes about herself is so emotional. It's this idea that all these thoughts and experiences come together to form who we think we are. But we also know something is about to go down. A lot of these introductions to the new ideas in this world now are basically a foreshadow to how all of it is gonna change. And that fact gives room for so much comedy. You know exactly what's about to happen after Joy slingshots the puberty alarm. Joy thinking things are fine just for something to instantly happen gets me every time. I'm a sucker for that setup. During this scene, there's very intense disaster music. It felt like a monster movie. It was itching my skin. I was all in at that moment. Unfortunately, the soundtrack doesn't feature Michael Giacchino outside of the classic Bundle of Joy song, which leads this film to have a lot less memorable music than the first one. I guess he was too busy doing the soundtrack to I guess. The demolition scene is probably the best scene in this movie when it comes to comedy. The little pill characters might be my favorite background characters. It's just a bunch of Viking sounding beans. Them leaving the scene after wrecking it all up, calling it a work in progress, is perfection. We get 2 new in real life characters, Riley's friends, who get some pretty funny moments. I wish they were in a lot more of this movie. They become a side element as Riley meets a new girl who she deems is way cooler, and it makes sense because it's showing Riley tossing them to the side as her interests and wants change. But there could have been just a tad bit more of their personalities and the friendship they have before this happens. When they are on screen, however, there's some really realistic interactions that Pixar nailed. I love that Pixar realized they can have more relevant, relatable interactions after turning Red and Luca. Too bad they recently came out and said that they don't want to do that, so I'm confused. I pray with this movie doing so well that they rethink that decision. Anxiety just appearing, jump scaring the emotions, is played out very comedically. Joy immediately treats her like how she did Sadness, telling Anxiety to stay in one place. I know exactly where this movie is going. Maya Hawke does a great voice performance. She really got in the studio and captured that anxious, over-the-top energy. I also love how a lot of the emotions kind of resemble the cast, even if it wasn't on purpose. Maybe I take that back. Now I kind of feel mean. I feel terrible. If it makes this guy feel any better, number 1, I have loved him in every movie he's been in. Number 2, he has like one voice line in this entire movie. And number 3, embarrassment becomes my favorite new emotion. His hoodie, his palm sweat, I was on his side from the very beginning. Yeah! You got Io Adebri as Envy. Envy's a very interesting character because she's envious, but in a positive way. I was thinking they were gonna have her be an emotion that causes Riley to have mean jealousy, but it's really just Riley wanting to be like the girls around her, which I favor a lot more because it builds up this less obvious way of showing that even if it seems positive to want to be like others and appreciate aspects of them, it can morph into these negative thoughts about yourself because you're not similar to them. They get so creative with this idea by having Riley eat food she doesn't like just to be friends with popular girl hockey prodigy Val. The scene where Riley has to pretend to not like a band because the rest of the hockey players deem it as immature really got me. I think I've been in this situation probably 10 times before. Ennui's just kind of there. I love the idea that she controls the console with a phone because she just doesn't want to get up. Little personality traits like this makes this such a fun world to watch. Speaking of voice acting, like half of the main emotions were recasted, and I only just remembered that when I started writing this script. Because I'm gonna be totally honest, they did pretty good. It was not recognizable to me. I don't know if that's because I forgot what they used to sound like, but the new voice actors for Fear and Disgust give slightly new voice cadences that still work and fit the personalities. I know, I miss Bill Hader as much as the next person, but I think Fear actually benefits a little bit with the new voice. I love the fact that Tony Hale screams every line.
And if we don't know where we're going, we can't follow the stream. It is an endless loop of tragedy and consequence.
Anxiety ends up thinking that Joy is gonna ruin Riley's chances of growth, and she decides that Riley should give up on her friends in favor of being on Val's team. And to do this, she takes off the belief system. The cut to Riley then choosing her decision is impeccable. Anxiety then gets all the main emotions bottled up and sent out of the headquarters for good. It's hard for me to really hate her while she does all this because she's so nonchalant about it. The emotions are all locked up in a vault containing other suppressed characters. I did not know how this scene was gonna play out, and I definitely didn't expect Pixar to do a Spider-Verse. They're really the last studio I'd expect to ever go outside of their story like this, but Inside Out 2 is an exception. We get this 2D character named Bluefy, who is from a children's cartoon Riley watched when she was younger. I don't know if that name was on purpose, but god, is it such a good bit. For a minute, I was scared this scene was gonna take me out of this movie. Sometimes inserting different animated elements can make a movie feel less timeless. It can sometimes make movies feel unwatchable outside of a theater watch, but no, they really connect these characters to the movie. I love Riley's secret video game crush, Lance Slashblade. The timing of him seeming like this cool warrior character to being useless is genius. We get one of my favorite small jokes where Joy notices that Riley is up way too early and is not getting enough sleep thanks to anxiety. For the whole story starting because of puberty, I do wish that the movie would have focused a tiny bit more on the time of being an actual gross teenager. Because sure, the part where Riley is giving her mom overreactions covers that. It doesn't really take much of a focus after anxiety is introduced. Which, yes, one could say anxiety is the puberty, but I don't know, I would have enjoyed to see a little bit more of how the parents react to this, because that made for some really funny bits in the beginning. Too bad because the story focuses on Riley at a hockey camp, the parents do not have much screen time at all. But you know, Turning Red kind of accomplished that. There's only so many specific jokes you can make when it comes to being a teenager. The rest of the emotions are kind of rooting for anxiety a little bit because she actually has a well thought out plan, and that makes for some good character dialogue. The main emotions give Joy quite a bit of pressure during the trip to the old sense of self, and she snaps. Such an unexpected scene that makes Joy 1,000 times more likable. No joke. I know there's Joy haters out there, but I think this movie really captures why she's such a good main character. Joy even ends up sending Sadness into the headquarters to, I guess, suck them all in when they do get to finding the old sense of self. It really shows Sadness growing as a character and being less scared to be involved, and it's so sweet to see Joy give her that attention. We get this really silly dynamic with embarrassment and sadness as he hesitantly helps her stay hidden from anxiety. I can't think of better emotions to pair together. And this also expands on this idea that even these new emotions want Joy and the rest of them to be there. They realize that anxiety is becoming too much, but they also don't want to mess with anything. So I really enjoyed embarrassment going behind their back to help the main emotions. That expanded him so much more. I wish they gave Envy some of that importance, but whatever. Off topic, but there's like 3 little ships this movie brings up. We got Fear and Anxiety. Fear legitimately says, I can fix her. You got Disgust and Lance Slashblade. And of course, Sadness and Embarrassment. I don't care about ships, but if DeviantArt was still relevant, it would be a field day for them right now. Anxiety is starting to go absolutely more insane, planting anxious thoughts into the belief system, replacing the good ones. And Anxiety does all this while smiling. I do really like, however, that Anxiety never ever seems totally happy with what she's doing. Even she, of course, has anxiety and indecisiveness for herself. Her little laughs as she does all of this still seem nervous, which is a great little detail. I understand how a lot of people take her as the villain, which yes, for the plot she is, but I also think she genuinely thinks this is her job and is what is needed. Anxiety can be good occasionally until it becomes overwhelming and a constant state, and I think the movie builds to show, similar to the first movie, that no one emotion is healthy if it becomes too much. And even Joy had to realize that for herself in the first movie, that just because she isn't in constant constant control doesn't mean Riley is doomed. This movie handles the colors in the mind so perfectly. I think thanks to Soul, Pixar is starting to utilize colors more than ever. With anxiety and control replacing joy, everything goes from this flowing blue to this intense orangey electrical look. The thing in this movie that actually gave me the most anxiety was when Riley was debating on stealing the coach's journal to find out if she made the team, and I was really praying she would not look at it. It stressed me out so much. I'm a goody two-shoes, guys. If someone says I can't look at something, I'm gonna feel guilty even just thinking about looking at it. I've seen some people bring up that it doesn't work as well as the first movie when Riley was stealing her mom's credit card, and to me it feels like sometimes the movie pushes Riley's morals a little bit too much. I also feel like the movie kind of switches the coach's personality halfway through, because she's super nice in the beginning of the movie and then she turns into Abby Lee Miller. Because what do you mean Riley isn't good enough? Are you watching her? It's also kind of strange because the big scrimmage game takes place the day after Riley sees her name next to the words "not good enough" on the notebook, and you'd think the coach would decide that during the last big game, but maybe I just don't know how intense trying to get on a high school hockey team is. I don't know, it seems like the sneaky looking at the journal side plot was being forced to play a bigger role, when really the tension was good enough, relying on Riley losing parts of herself, but it wasn't confusing or boring enough for me to be mad at it. And the animation looked so good. I love how this setting looked on the big screen. I saw a behind the scenes clip and it blew my mind that they can just make this atmosphere appear. The fact that literally none of this exists is actually insane to me. Like, a studio just brought these characters to life. They are not actually real beings. In favor of a more complex real life story for Riley, it does tend to leave the actual mission to be a lot less hard for the main emotions. The journey to get the sense of self back to headquarters builds more on Joy starting to think that maybe Riley doesn't need her as much as she gets older, and so that leads the actual way back to seem pretty easy for the characters. There's not as many obstacles in the way as the first movie had, which is probably why I didn't feel like this movie hit as much on first watch. There was just a lot more stakes in the first movie as it was entirely new to the emotions. Thankfully for this sequel, it gives more room for development with the actual emotions than if they were to have such a big focus on a treacherous adventure back. The emotions really start to become a team in this film. In spirit, all of them come together to be beautifully human. It gave me that classic spark I've been missing from Pixar. Don't even get me started on how much I loved Anger in this movie. He really becomes this father figure for the emotions, and that offers such fun dialogue as the emotions are confused by his sudden wholesomeness. There's still some funny scenarios this movie does bring in. A sarcasm opens up while the emotions are trying to ride a stream. Now this is how you do puns. Cloudy with the chance of meatballs too. This scene actually has a purpose to continuing the world and story. The voice changing as they yell for help might be my favorite Pixar gag in a while. My dad was cracking up beside me. I'm so surprised that Pete Docter didn't direct this movie, because God, does Kelsey Mann capture what made the first movie so good in terms of the comedy that comes with the concept. Even better, the movie tops this with the pillow fight scene. The emotions find this tent that has a bunch of characters drawing anxious thoughts for Riley to think about, and Joy tries to get them all to revolt and draw positive thoughts, and with some convincing, they actually do. It truly shows that this whole world is being controlled by anxiety, and just like embarrassment, are craving joy and peace. And this idea that a team of characters are just drawing our bad thoughts in our head like storyboard artists is genius. One of my favorite lines from this movie comes from this scene, and it's when anxiety questions who is putting good visions into Riley's head, and then she says,
"Joy, I know you're in there."
It was so unexpected, I was actually scared. I have not seen dialogue from a Pixar movie like this. She doesn't even question how the main emotions got out. Around this time, the movie gets really strong and starts to feel like it knows where it's heading. During the first 20 minutes, you're kind of wondering where this will all lead to, but this is where they lock in and you know you're in good arms. We get the parade of future career balloons, which kind of look like corporate designs, and the emotions use one of the balloons to ride their way to the back of the mind. The visuals in the brainstorm scene are phenomenal. All that flowing green looked mesmerizing. The first movie had more of a sad, depressing atmosphere, and this movie greatly favors this all over the place crazy atmosphere, and I love that separation. Joy eventually gives up again. In lots of ways, she has stayed the same character as she was in the first movie, but I appreciate that they don't go the cliche route and make her give up entirely. Something I worried about with this movie was that it was gonna end up thinking it needed to try and be sad just to top the first movie, and that it was maybe gonna overly emphasize emphasize sad moments, but I'm so glad that didn't happen. Joy still wants to try for Riley, even despite realizing that she's not as needed anymore, and it's a tearjerker. The hope that she still has is very realistic to her character. We're getting into the part that most of you have been waiting for me to talk about, which is the scene where Anxiety gets so ingrained in trying to have Riley win 3 points during the last camp's game, and sends her into an anxiety attack. The way this scene is set up is so strong, it felt so real, I could hear a needle drop in the theater. I know there's been quite some discussion about the recent influx in panic attacks in media for some reason, and so far I think they've all been really good depictions, even if they're not spot on. The only way to experience an accurate panic attack is by having a panic attack, which I would not recommend, but I could not think of a better movie that deserves to portray it. Also, to be clear, yes, I know panic attacks and anxiety attacks are 2 different things, but everybody has already kind of inevitably compared this scene with those other scenes. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish did an amazing job, but it wasn't like that movie would have suffered without it. It was so good because we didn't know it would happen in that sort of movie. I don't think you could even call the Mario scene a panic attack though. I'm pretty sure Mario was just worried because he was getting destroyed. I think Twitter has kind of forgot that normal reactions to danger also exist in media. The anxiety attack happening in Inside Out 2 was very obvious and needed to show how anxiety is hurting Riley in the long run, even if it's not her intention. The visual of anxiety being in this storm of circling light without being able to move, even when the tear that drops from her eye shows she wants to, is so genius. I would pay $10,000 to go into the storyboard room the day they started working on this scene. It sounds so interesting. I want to know what other ideas they had for it. I'm so glad they ended on this perfect mix of craziness, but also simple enough to really feel for Riley. Joy breaks anxiety out of this funk and puts back on the original belief system. But then through the eyes of anxiety, realizing that she can't control Riley, Joy also realizes that she's just as wrong for trying to keep Riley believing she's a perfect good person. And in fact, that's not even what Riley needs, as this film shows that even though Joy managed to replace the new belief system with the old one, it doesn't help Riley. It only poses as this unrealistic outlook that bottles up our true feelings. Understanding that, Joy decides to take it off again, and there a new sense of self pops up, one that is a blend of all these emotions. And oh my god, did I get full body chills. The other emotions reacting to this and then coming together to hug it to offer Riley comfort in that specific moment is so good. Oh my god. Riley's friends forgiving her so easily despite her being a jerk to them is great unconditional support. Shout out to her friends. There's this self-awareness to all these characters, even Embarrassment starts to accept himself. And instead of the film going, Riley deep down is a good person no matter how she acts, the movie decides, you know what, she does mess up and make mistakes, but she also does good things. The belief system becomes this mix of good and bad, just like life. Inside Out 2 doesn't make anxiety the bad guy that needs to be defeated, because truthfully, Joy has always been just as stubborn. They choose to go the route of all the emotions, learning that they can't control Riley, and the movie ends on the note that no, Joy doesn't leave as you get older, because it's not as black and white as that. We are filled with so many emotions that are constantly happening. You're not stuck with one emotion forever. The writers also decide to kind of not let you know if Riley made the coach's team, because Riley realizes no matter what, she will find happiness and peace in whatever happens. And I love that. At first, of course, me and my family were like, are they not gonna wrap that up? But then it hit me, and I'm glad they went that route. I already want to watch this movie like 3 times more. If anything, at the end of the day, this movie accomplishes what most Pixar movies do, which is being there whenever I need something to feel better about living. That's dramatic, but it's so true. I cannot wait for the 3rd one. I feel like they have set up at least one more that could be really good. I want a young adult Riley. I want to see the emotions trying to buy groceries for themselves. I want to see the tax evasion emotion. Since starting this video, this movie has made $400 million in the box office. I really hope this gets Pixar back on their leg. I also hope Inside Out 2 continues to let Pixar and animation studios in general know that audiences are interested in deeply personal stories. I'm so glad that late Gen Z and the next generations have slowly started getting to grow up with stories that show different lives and how no one is defined by bad or good characteristics. Life is a blend. And sure, most children's media has good morals and has for a while now, but the topics are touched on in a more rose-colored glasses way that the studio deems is appropriate and the easiest to portray. With Puss in Boots 2, 2, Inside Out 2, and Nimona the most. We're getting animated movies that are stepping closer into exploring more realistic feelings without being scared to do so, and it's obviously paying off. Okay, thanks for watching, stay awesome, let me know your thoughts on Inside Out 2.